Good afternoon. Thank you, Geeta. Thank you, Dr. Geeta, for that introduction. Okay. As our MLSM President Dato Venu just said at the start, we at MLSM are truly delighted to be spending this Saturday afternoon with all of you to bring a voice to some extremely important topics. And now we are about to tackle, after the recent presentation, which was very inspiring, we're now going to tackle a very important topic, a rather invisible problem, and that is domestic violence. Now, the issues have escalated in these times of COVID, and I believe some of the information that will be shared by our two esteemed speakers will be both eye-opening as well as instrumental to all of those of us who may want to recognize and hopefully help people who may be in need. Now, it's my privilege to introduce the very first speaker, and that is Ms. Goh Swee Lin. Ms. Swee Lin is a barrister of law of the Middle Temple, and she has been in practice for 25 years now. She's a founding partner of a firm, Sern Huey, and her focus is on family and child rights. She has a diverse practice and has practiced in all tiers of the Malaysian court system, but is more importantly known as one of the thought leaders of family law and matters relating to the well-being of women, children, and families. Top of her long list of accomplishments, and there are many, is that she was the president of the Association of Women Lawyers in 2015 to 2017 and became the first female chairperson of the Kuala Lumpur Bar Committee in 2017 to 2018. For this incredibly difficult but important topic, on behalf of MLSN, we are very privileged to have Swee Lin give us her perspective of the domestic violence narrative in Malaysia. Swee Lin, the space and time is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting me. Let me share my screen and the PowerPoint. Okay. So I just wanted to say that sometimes, as Shanti has correctly stated, domestic violence is actually a very invisible violence behind closed doors. And sometimes, apart from the physical injuries that are apparent from physical beatings of violence, we have the unseen emotional violence that are committed against the women. So I just wanted to show this very powerful installation and also a video first, so that it sort of puts our mind in the right frame. Okay, so if Jason could play this short clip.
Heat. 440 pairs of high heels have been hung in Istanbul, commemorating the 440 women killed as a result of domestic violence in Turkey last year. The installation was erected in the center of the city by artist Vahit Tuna.
The term femicide is something people are not aware of, and we see that they're discussing it, but until now, they haven't challenged themselves about it. I think this creates awareness and is something that influences people and makes them think.
In Turkey, shoes are traditionally placed outside the front door of those who die. With the stark structure in such a public setting, the rows of silhouettes send a powerful message to passers-by.
As long as everybody remains silent, violence against women will increase. And this violence is not just about murdering women, but also suppressing and silencing them. Women are also suffering because the vital rights are not provided. We should not remain silent to this anymore. We need to speak.
49 women were reportedly killed this August alone.
No, I just listened to you.
Okay, so whenever you want, you let us know.
Sure, okay.
Okay, so I'll go back to my screen. Not sure. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let me try again. Okay, so I just wanted to highlight this is what is the global statistics, and I believe Malaysian statistics also are very high. So the research does show that many of the women who are murdered by mainly their partners or relatives. So out of the 87,000 women globally around the world in 2017, 50 of them were murdered by an ex-partner. So the ex-partner also could include intimate partners, or also partners of the same sex. So I just wanted to talk about CEDAW so that we have a little bit of knowledge about the legal framework to push for protective legislation and equality. So first concept is CEDAW, which is short for the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, all forms of discrimination against women. And this UN convention was adopted and ratified by Malaysia on the 1st of January 1995. And you can actually see it adopted within our constitutional framework under Article 8, where it basically provides that all persons are equal before the law and entitled to equal protection of the law. So the principle behind it is that you cannot discriminate based on a person's race, religion, descent, and gender. So these are the specific constitutional safeguards that one must observe and is protected under our constitutional framework. So these are the key areas that are protected and emphasized under the law: equal treatment, equal protection, and specific prohibition against discrimination. So as you know, there are many ways a person is hurt, and domestic violence encompasses a huge spectrum, be it physical, psychological, sexual, financial, and increasingly there's also online abuse and litigation abuse in private and public spheres, many years after the couple may have separated, and also the children. So it is actually a very insidious kind of impact that actually can also go on for many generations to come within the family and the community. So how do we actually think as a community, as a professional, as a legal professional and medical professional, how do we protect these people in Malaysia, with those people that we care for? How can we help them reach for justice and to be educated about their rights? So first of all, we need the law. We need to hold those perpetrators accountable. We need to educate all the survivor, the children, those people who are vulnerable in the community about their rights, or if they are not able to support themselves, then to walk with them in their journey to achieve justice. So that's why we need to be sensitized, we need to be educated, we need to be empowered with knowledge. So this is the Domestic Violence Act, which deals specifically with legal protection for domestic violence and matters in connection with that. So this act came into place on the 1st of June of 1996. So under the Domestic Violence Act, there are these areas of abuse that have been defined. So the first, I just go through a few of them. So you can see there on the top, there's emotional abuse. So what constitutes emotional abuse? It could be criticisms, put downs, humiliating statements, calling the person, very vulgar slurs, like if whore, slut, the words like that is usually seen in the family cases that I deal with. Physical abuse, so it can also include hitting, shoving, battering, use of weapons such as parangs, knives, burning the victim, biting the victim. For sexual abuse, there is the rape, but unfortunately in the context of a married man and woman, marital rape is not recognized as a crime, and we can talk about it later on. There's also sexual harassment and also treating the survivor victim in a demeaningly sexual way. So what is psychological abuse? Psychological abuse includes threats, intimidation, threats of harm, isolating the victim. And it also can be when a perpetrator takes the victim's property and damages it, like throws the laptop, takes away the phone, you know, and socially isolates the victim from her family and her, you know, friends. As for economical abuse, as you know, money makes people jump over mountains, sometimes can move mountains as well. So the perpetrator uses money to make the victim financially dependent on him or her, and also prevents the victim from working and earning an independent living, and prevents also the victim from maybe getting an education or higher education to improve herself or himself to increase that person's earning capacity. So these are the different types of domestic violence. So what's important is, like, we need to know who are protected under the Act. So the Act covers these categories of people, and I've set it out there: his or her spouse, his or her former spouse, those who have been divorced, a child who is defined as a person below 18 years, an incapacitated adult, the definition I will share later, any other member of the family. Also, I will share the definition after this. Okay, so for spouse, well, a spouse includes a de facto spouse. So what does that mean? It means a ceremony which is not recognized in law, but is recognized according to that person's religion or custom. Because after the 1st of March 1982, Malaysia passed its Law Reform Marriage and Divorce Act, which is an act only to govern monogamous marriages. So some parties do still undergo marriage ceremonies, for example, Hindu temple rites, or for the Chinese tea ceremony. So these kind of marriages, although they are not valid in law, is sufficient to fall under the protection of the Domestic Violence Act. So the second part here, which says notwithstanding that such ceremony is not registered or not capable of being registered under any written law. So like in Malaysia, if you have like a marriage ceremony between two persons of the same sex, there is no capacity, both of them don't have a capacity to marry each other, because under our act, marriage only can be contracted between a male and a woman, a male and a female, according to the biological sex assigned at birth. Okay, so this is the definition of an incapacitated adult, which means a person who is wholly or partially incapacitated or infirm by reason of permanent or temporary physical or mental disability or ill health or old age, living as a member of the family. Okay, so this person is also protected. What about other members of the family? Sorry, there's a typo there. Any other member of the family means adult son or daughter, father or mother of the offender, brother or sister or relative of the offender, who in the opinion of the court should be regarded as a member of the family. For example, maybe the grandmother, you know, and all that. So I've listed here a few statutes that are commonly referred to when we are talking about domestic violence in the civil and criminal context. So there's firstly the Parent Act, which is the Domestic Violence Act. Then it was later amended in 2012, the Amendment Act, and again in 2017. So the Domestic Violence Act is read together with the Penal Code because it is attached to it so that all the offences against the person's body has been defined in the Penal Code. So the new offences of psychological abuse, emotional injury, using intoxicating substances against the victim without his or her consent was included under the Amendment Act of 2012. And in the 2017 Amendment Act, the inclusion was misappropriating property, and which causes the victim distress, and using communicating including electronically with the survivor to insult modesty. So these are the main amendments under the 2012 and 2017 Act. I've also added in the Sexual Offences Against Children Act 2017, which also specifically protects children and recognizes the new offense of child grooming, child pornography, as well as includes an extraterritorial jurisdiction where an offender, it could be a parent residing in this country, abusing the child and maybe streaming sexual materials overseas, or bringing the child over, committing the act of sexual abuse overseas whilst he is in Malaysia. So all these are caught by the Sexual Offences Against Children Act. So what are some of the penal code provisions that we are usually referred to when we use the Domestic Violence Act? I've set them all here, and you can have a quick glance of it, through it. First, we have Section 323, which is voluntarily causing hurt. The second one, 324, causing hurt by dangerous weapons or means. 325, causing grievous hurts, and all that, and the punishment. So it also, if you go down to the bottom, it also includes wrongful restraint, wrongful confinement. So that is also an offense under the Penal Code. I just wanted to touch on rape, which is Section 375. So rape is sexual penetration between a man and a woman. So the important exception here is that it excludes marital rape from being an offense, having the same severity of punishment. So this is an area which many women's groups are still fighting to remove this exception. There is a lesser offense of Section 375A, which is listed at the bottom, where the husband causes hurt to have sexual intercourse, but it carries a lesser punishment. Then the rest are sexual connection by object, inciting a child to an act of gross indecency, and others. I wanted to highlight this section, Section 427, when you commit mischief and damage property worth up to 25 ringgit, and Section 428, by killing or maiming an animal. So this sometimes in domestic violence situations, someone may actually kill your pet cat or pet dog or pet hamster. So this is an offense under the Penal Code. Just wanted to highlight this. So below here, there's also Section 507, which is criminal intimidation by an anonymous communication. So it could be through some anonymous account. Okay, so now we talk about lodging a police report. So first of all, where should one lodge his or her report? Usually where you reside, where you stay, or where the perpetrator stays, or where the violence happened. It could be in the workplace, it could be in a public place, it could be in the lift of your apartment, and where you are temporarily located, maybe a shelter, near a shelter, or near your mother's house. Yeah. So you go to the nearest police station or the JKM department, which is the social welfare department. You can get assistance for someone to accompany you. And in addition to that, you should also, approach one of the NGOs who are very familiar and conversant in supporting domestic violence survivors. And today we'll hear from WAO what they do. So if you need also further context, there's No Alert and the National Legal Aid Foundation, in addition to the Malaysian Bar Legal Aid Centers, which there are one in every state. So I've extracted a sample police report. This is something from the WCC Penang NGO website. And it's a very simple sample, but basically you should set out the basic information, the date, the time of the occurrence of the offense, where were you, who was the perpetrator, the name and IC, what was the offense that was done or the violence committed against you, as much detail as you can. And also if contemporaneously with the event, you can, you must have the presence of mind also to be aware that anything you do will affect the quality of the evidence that may be needed at trial later if you do decide to go down that route. So tell a friend, you know, don't bathe if you have been raped. If you have like all these pornographic or hostile messages that are of violent content, don't delete it, save it in your phone, forward it to yourself by email if need be, and things like that. So under the Domestic Violence Act, there are 3 types of protection orders. The emergency protection order, which is valid for 7 days, and you don't need to file a police report, you don't need to go to court, you can do it yourself, okay? So the next stage is, so it was only valid for 7 days because it's really under emergency situation, and it should be issued out within 24 hours. For the interim protection order, this kicks in after investigation starts and lasts as long as the investigation is ongoing by the police. And then once investigation is completed and the accused is charged, you can then apply within a time frame for the protection order to be issued by the court. So there are specific guidelines for that in the Act. Okay, so that's the emergency protection order. So one of the benefits of the emergency protection order, I just wanted to highlight this, is that it is, you can do it by yourself, it's ex parte, nobody else, the other side, the perpetrator or abuser is not involved at all. You can just go to the JKM, if this is the SOP, so I don't know in real life how fast they act, but it's supposed to be issued 2 hours after you make an application. So once you make the application, 2 hours later, the EPO must come out. After the EPO comes out, the police are instructed to serve the EPO within 10 hours of its issuance within the district where the perpetrator stays. So 2 hours issuance, 10 hours, it must be served, sent to the district police where the perpetrator stays, and within that further 12 hours, he must be served personally. So the perpetrator must be served personally. So that gives you a time frame of 24 hours. So for interim protection order, this, as I said earlier, is valid as long as investigations are ongoing and can be set aside within 14 days of service. So we'll talk about it later. Just wanted to highlight that the Section 5 protection order, which is granted by the court based on a balance of probabilities, standard of proof, is only valid for 12 months and can be extended for further periods of 12 months. Okay. So what is the benefit of getting a protection order? So many may not be aware that you can get various permutations, especially, and I just want to highlight these sections that has specifically provided, and the first one is granting the right of exclusive occupation to the shared residence. So if there's a family home, the perpetrator is there, he can be evicted, he or she can be evicted, okay? The next order, you can prohibit or restrain the person from continuing to commit the violence against you, and C, from entering, permitting you to enter the residence. If you don't want to stay there, you can be allowed an order to enter the shared residence. And when you enter the shared residence, the police can be requested to accompany you. So additional orders, don't make further communication by any means. So any means is a little bit wide. So I suppose you can also argue that it will include technologically facilitated abuse, you know, and for Section 6(1)(e), this is a great development. The victim is allowed continued use of the family car or motorcycle or whatever vehicle the family uses. Yeah. So we know what the court can do and the orders that they can make, but what is the role of the police under the Domestic Violence Act? So they can assist the survivor to file the protection orders, the IPO and PO. They can arrange for transportation for the victim to a place of safety. They can also arrange transportation for the victim to the hospital for medical examination and it should be a government hospital, and explaining to the victim the rights to protection, accompanying the victim to the residence to collect his or her personal belongings, arresting the perpetrator if he breaches the protection orders, And also under section 19, this is section 19, the police have the responsibility to inform the victim in writing of the status of the investigation. So the victim is not left hanging in the air. This is actually a positive duty on the police. And also on the status of, in the case of IPO, the status of the service of the order. So this is a classic recent example during COVID of Sugu Pavitra. Everybody knows this very wonderful YouTuber. And unfortunately, she faced her own incidents of domestic abuse where her husband had turned up drunk in the in the hospital with a sickle. So the Domestic Violence Act then obviously took into effect and he was arrested. Yeah. Whether she later withdrew her report, but it is not, so this is one of the weaknesses in our system. She withdrew the report, but it's unclear as to what kind of legal protection she has after the withdrawal of her report. So this is something that maybe she could consider, getting a civil remedy, a restraining order against him from further committing abuse against her. So here I just wanted to show you an example of what this kuasa penangkapan looks like. So this is an IPO or interim protection order. If you can see here in yellow, Perintah Pelindungan interim protection order. So maka kamu, the perpetrator, dihalang daripada menggunakan keganasan rumah tangga terhadap, then the name of the survivor is here. So it's specifically spelled out. And here in the next paragraph, sekiranya kamu melanggar perintah tersebut, if you breach this order, kamu boleh ditangkap di bawah section 7. So you can be arrested immediately, okay, and be punished under section 8. That's an IPO. So this is a PO, protection order. So if you go through, this is the application, so and so, and I want to show you the yellow highlighted portion in the middle of the screen. So the court has given, telah mengeluarkan satu perintah pelindungan yang memihak kepada, then the name of the survivor is here. Okay, so this is a protection order that's issued. And this is the perintah tambahan, the additional orders, the additional conditions that can be attached to the protection order. So you saw it in those point forms, but this is some of it in this specific order. If you look under, in the middle of the page, paragraph A, larangan memasuki tempat kediaman premis kerja. So that you cannot go to the residence, you cannot go to the workplace, sekolah, you cannot go to the school, atau membuat hubungan dengan si mangsa or make any contact with the victim. Membenarkan mangsa mengambil semula barang kepunyaannya dengan ditemani dengan pegawai penguatkuasa, to allow the victim to enter and to take her personal belongings. So this is just an example of the conditions that can be attached to a protection order. How much time do I have? I better quickly finish. Okay.
You've got about a minute, Celine.
Okay, so you talk about money, compensation. So if you have suffered from domestic violence, what can you get? You can get compensation for medical treatment that you have sought. Maybe if you went to a clinic, you had to go for psychiatric treatment, you had to take time off work, you lost your promotion because you were depressed and couldn't perform, or he destroyed your property, he rammed into your car, he killed your valuable pedigree pet or whatever. So these are all the heads of compensation, some examples. And this case in 2015, in this instance, the wife was awarded compensation of 4,000. Actually, the injuries in this case was quite severe. Let me just look at it. So I think she had been beaten physically, and the doctor prepared the medical report and testified in court about the injuries that she had actually sustained. The other case was this case in Sabah. And in this case, what happened was she claimed that he had committed unreasonable behavior and had used abusive language against her, mental emotional abuse, and threats of physical abuse. But the court held that there was no evidence, there was no medical report, there was no material before the court to then give her anything under Section 10 of the Act. I just wanted to share and close with this case of Nur Hidayah Ghani, one of the cases that I conducted watching brief on for WAO. And in this case, Nur Hidayah was murdered by her husband in 2013. This is her mother and her 3 sisters. And the thing is, I wanted to highlight was Nur Hidayah had protection order after protection order after protection order. And she lodged multiple police reports whenever her husband came to her residence, her place of work. He stalked her, you know, he intimidated her. And when she informed the police of all these breaches of the protection order, unfortunately, they fell on deaf ears. So Nur Hidayah paid the heaviest price any woman could pay. She paid with her life. And so on 2013, she was murdered with one of the most gruesome bodily injuries that the medical profession had seen. Her children have now become virtually an orphans because the father was recently sentenced to hanging for her murder. So under the criminal procedure, there is this avenue for the family after a full trial and after a positive verdict. They have the avenue of telling their story, what we call the victim impact statement. And actually, I have Nur Hidayah's family victim impact statement here today. And what the mother said was they had filed 8 to 10 police reports. And I just read it out in Malay because you're Malaysians, right? So anak-anak arwah Hidayah kini menjadi anak yatim. Mereka kehilangan tempat mengadu dan akan membesar tanpa kasih sayang, pelayan dan bimbingan ibu. Selepas kehilangan ibu, anak sulung iaitu Ahman menjadi kurang terkawal. Dia sering mencarut dan memaki hamun orang lain. Dia juga menghentakkan kepala di dinding serta memukul dan memijak-mijak anggota badan adiknya. Anak-anak telah melihat ayah mereka membunuh ibu mereka di depan mata mereka sendiri. Akibatnya, mereka rasa benci, dendam yang teramat sangat terhadap ayah mereka. Perasaan ini mungkin memberi impak kepada kebolehan mereka untuk menjalin hubungan yang sihat pada masa depan. So the daughter, for instance, said dia tidak ingin berkahwin kerana tidak ingin senasib dengan arwah ibunya. The brother then says he wants to change his family name to his grandfather's. So it is not just one incident. This has intergenerational impact. And in the case of that son, he has then displayed similar actions as his violent father. He has now also resorted to kicking and hitting his younger siblings. So I hope that Nur Hidayah did not die in vain and that we all can make a difference in the work that we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charlene. I think you've touched a chord in everyone who was listening today, and you've inspired a lot of questions that are going to be coming. I'm going to ask those who have questions. We'll keep it for the end of the session. Please put it into the Q&A. Thank you so much, Charlene. I'm going to now introduce the next speaker, no less illustrious, Ms. Charlene Faye Murray. I'm delighted to introduce her to all of you. She's the Services Director of the Women's Aid Organization, an organization which specializes in services and advocacy of women who are survivors of gender-based violence. I think Charlene's presentation has really moved me, and I think that Charlene will be adding on to this real awareness that all of us need to have regarding this invisible problem. Charlene heads the services division and oversees all processes which encompass individual case management, strategies to increase better economic and financial skills, empowerment, and ensures that WAO shelters and other facilities are in accordance with world-class standards for operations. With a background in psychology and 17 years of experience and institutional knowledge of gender-based violence under her belt, Charlene has worn many hats in different organizations and worked with various populations and ethnicities in the area of women's rights. Her experiences include grassroots level engagement as well as to high level policy engagements. Prior to her current stint, she served at the UNHCR in Malaysia as a protection associate in the area of sexual gender-based violence for more than half a decade, and was also the anti-trafficking in persons focal point. We are indeed privileged to hear what she has to share on this topic. Charlene, the space and time is yours.
Thank you, Shanti. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. If Jason, you could share the slide. Thank you. So thank you, Shanti, for the introduction. And perhaps what I am going to start very quickly with is what exactly does WAO do? So for many of you here, you are probably familiar with our Women's Aid Organization, which was established in 1982 with the main concept to provide shelter for battered women as well as women who were in need, as well as to conduct individual case management. So over the years, we have grown. We no longer just do shelter and case management, but we have grown robustly in the area of advocacy for women's rights and child rights, as well as we have grown amazingly in the area of capacity building and engaging grassroots levels to ensure that the area of gender-based violence is efficiently targeted at the get-go of it. So today we are taking a journey on how COVID-19 has really impacted domestic violence cases, as well as survivors and their access to justice, as well as the legal systems that are in place, or rather in limbo, in this whole period of time. So I just wanted to give everyone a very quick overview, and could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm not going to go very much into this because Charlene has already very kindly gone into the specifics of what is the types of domestic violence and what really is listed out as areas of domestic violence under the Domestic Violence Act. And as what the previous speaker Charlene has mentioned, the Domestic Violence Act, the DVA, is really read together with the Penal Code, and it is a criminal offense if someone is charged under the act itself. And a very quick explanation of how and why the various forms of abuses are important to constantly be reminded and constantly be flashed out to everyone is because when we look at the word domestic violence, the typical scenario that comes to mind is someone who has sustained physical injuries, someone who has been battered, and injuries and abuses which can be seen by the naked eye. However, if you look at the kinds of abuses that constitutes as domestic violence, it is really much bigger than what the naked eye can see. Okay, the next slide, please. So what I really want to do today is to take you through the statistics of the way domestic violence has evolved over this whole period of COVID. And this will give you a better picture of where we are at, how the whole pandemic has affected survivors of domestic violence, has escalated matters of domestic violence within families and institutions, and what exactly are we looking at when we say that there is a rise in numbers. So here we are looking at, so what Women's Aid Organization has done is that we have put together statistics, and for many of you who already do know, Women's Aid Organization does have a hotline as well as a WhatsApp and SMS messaging service, which is called TINA, which stands for Think I Need Aid. And the reason why we put it as TINA is because any woman can put it in their phone, and it could just be another name that is under their address book, so that it can help them conceal that there is a helpline number there. the reason why women's organization also undertook a WhatsApp and SMS messaging service is because we acknowledge that there are times when women in crisis are unable to make that call, are unable to speak freely, and that texting and messaging may be another form of reaching out safely to ensure that they receive the help or are given the options that they need to explore. So looking at here at this slide, we have compiled the number of cases or that we have received through our hotline and TINA collectively. And if you look at the staggering numbers here, we have a 350% increase in cases which reached out to WAO through our hotlines starting in April itself. So as you see in March itself, on the 18th of March, when the MCO was implemented across the country, and there was that whole rule about only head of household being able to go out, and then subsequently it was relaxed in May, if I believe, to 2 individuals from the household is able to go out in one vehicle. It had caused a lot of damage in the areas where families or any institutions, family institutions, which have already had a heightened risk of domestic violence. So from the regular numbers that we received, which were in the 200s, in March itself, for half that month, we had already seen a significant increase of numbers. And in April, the staggering numbers of close to 900 cases was recorded. And what I also wanted to highlight was during the period of COVID, especially in March itself, if you remember correctly, when the whole country was put under lockdown and essential services were the only services that were allowed to operate, there was a couple of days where Talian Kasih was actually shut down. And that was when there was an outcry of where would women and children who were, or even men who were in a situation of abuse would reach out to, given that the 15999 number, which is Talian Kasih, is the specific number which bypasses the 999 system and goes straight to JKM as well as police divisions, where they focus on rescuing and addressing issues of abuse. So what then happened was that even though the Talian Kasih did reopen, we acknowledged that they were bogged down by the various questions and COVID concerns, including the other areas of communities which JKM typically serves, which are the vagrant communities, the OKU communities, the communities of elderly individuals who may not have family or systemic support. So what really took a backseat then was the women and children who were abused and their ability to reach out for help in these times of crisis. So looking at these numbers here, you would see that in June, it was an all-time high until June, where our MCO was introduced, and the numbers subsequently reduced, but it did not reduce back to the numbers that we would have had pre-COVID. And what we haven't really looked at this month itself is what the October numbers are like, given that CMCO was re-implemented in different states. And I believe that there will be a up and down of this trend, but the numbers are here to stay. Also, to talk a little bit more about this is how what we typically saw, the kinds of cases that we received in July, August, and September were really the aftermath of what MCO had done to families who were stuck in that abusive situations and had no avenues of reaching out. Okay, next slide, please. So another thing that I also wanted to add was that on the 15th of April, Women's Aid Organization collaborated with the CPRC, which is the Crisis Preparedness and Response Center, which was set up by MOH as well as Mercy Malaysia. So MOH and Mercy Malaysia recognized that 999 as well as 15999 were not sufficient to receive cases of gender-based violence, or rather in this area, domestic violence. And therefore, the calls were which went through those specific hotlines were funneled into WAO's hotlines, which allowed us to have a greater reach for individuals who are outside the Klang Valley, even though we do operate typically within the Klang Valley. So the numbers that you were looking at earlier on were really numbers from all over Malaysia and not just within Klang Valley itself. And so right now, to very quickly go through it, so what we do is when we receive calls, we put them through, we put them down as the various forms of abuse to get better statistical input and data, and to also understand the trends better. But for March all the way up to September, the trends were pretty consistent in the area of where it had risen much of. And if you look here, we're looking at a table of March being the controlled, sort of the control group, and the following months of the kinds of top 6 cases, actually, the top 5 forms of violence, as well as the last one, which is the general inquiry that we have received. Looking at the chart here, the one in light green, which is at the bottom at all the charts, you can see that those are typically the numbers of domestic violence cases that had reached out to Women's Aid Organization through the hotline as well as STINA. And what was really staggeringly high as well, even though not in volume, but in quantity based on the previous month's pre-COVID era, were cases of rape that had reached out to us. And if you look down here, there's actually a section of non-DVA, which I would like to explain further. So as what the previous speaker, Charlene, has mentioned, the Domestic Violence Act provides protection to those who are protected under the Act, which are individuals or family members, spouses, children, elderly who are within a family setting, those who are connected by marriage, whether it is through legal marriage or through traditional marriages. However, when we look at non-domestic violence cases, we are, non-DVA related cases, they are notwithstanding still domestic violence cases. However, they are not in a situation of legal marriage. So these are also the statistics that we take down. So we're talking about individuals who are living, who are cohabitating, intimate partner violence of individuals who are not in a marriage setting. We're talking about family members who may be distantly related, who are living in a similar house or areas where several families live in a communal home. And these are typically apparent for individuals of a certain B40 population, the migrant population, as well as refugee populations as well. And what we had also seen a very sad but true increase is in child abuse. There were several, there was quite a large spike of child abuse cases. So child abuse cases would be the light blue cases right on top of each right on top of each chart. And typically we used to get 1 or 2 cases that would report to us. And we are looking at 22, 9, 13, 10, 11 cases that are coming through. And again, you know, what we are looking at is undoubtedly the tip of the icebergs and individuals who were able to call us. We also want to say that if you look at the general inquiries, which is the orange tab here, it may seem like those are questions that have nothing to do with domestic violence, but we find that many of the general inquiries are concerned neighbors who are living within communities who have seen abuse, who have heard abuse within the neighborhood and would like to know what they could do about it. Individuals who are not sure if they themselves are in a situation of abuse and would like to gather more information to assess their current situation. And what was typically interesting as well to see, which are the blue tabs, are relationship disputes. And these are the reason why they are not classified under the non-DVA domestic violence or domestic violence itself, or because these were relationship arguments between family members and intimate partners that may not have other forms of abuse, which is part of their issues. However, we do need to say this, that whenever you are in a situation of relationship disputes, there's always that chance that psychological violence is there and it's present. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So since we're focusing on domestic violence today, and we want to very quickly zoom in on what has really happened to the whole domestic violence situation in Malaysia, we further broke down the statistical data that we had received on cases of domestic violence. So again, here I broke it down to those which are individuals who are protected under the Domestic Violence Act and individuals who are not protected under the Domestic Violence Act. And a very important point to make is that when we talk about non-Domestic Violence Act related cases, we're talking about the inability of these individuals to seek protection. So if you lodge a police report, it will be classified under the penal code if there is bodily harm. However, chances are, if you are cohabitating with your partner or your girlfriend and boyfriend living in the same home, that there is definitely no avenues of getting a EPO, emergency protection order, an IPO, or even a protection order should the case be taken up by the authorities, simply because there is no provision in law that provides that additional support to individuals who are not, who do not fall within the Domestic Violence Act. So if you look at both of these charts here, psychological violence is really the highest violence that we have recorded. And the reason being because we acknowledge that with all forms of violence, physical, financial, social, sexual, there will definitely be the element of psychological violence. So it is impossible for one person to only experience one form of violence. It would be inaccurate to only pick and choose the right violence that they have experienced. Therefore, to better and more accurately depict the whole picture of domestic violence, we ensured that we went through the categories with women who have reported on cases and sought our assistance. And we managed to obtain this data here. So financial abuse was also one of the highest ones, and social abuse, again, in the context of MCO, because individuals were not allowed to leave their home. They were not allowed to seek assistance from family members or friends due to the travel bans and the restrictions of the hours of traveling. We had individuals who called us in the middle of the night and would like to live an abusive situation, but were not able to because there's no taxi, there's no Grab drivers, etc. And their only way was to try and rather our only way was to assist them in trying to get the bilik gerakan in the police departments to conduct rescues at their homes. And even then, I have to say that was really quite a challenging thing to do. And also, if you look at the number of cases that Women's Aid Organization have been handling just via hotline and all, and just to also mention that that is not where our intervention stops. We have a sizable number of social workers on board where it goes through the whole system of people calling through this hotline. The hotline is managed by frontline operators, and then the cases are then funneled to social workers to contact the clients and to work out the individual needs of each case management that is needed by the woman or the child. And the assistance then would be to provide them with advice, with technical expertise, as well as to get them in touch with the relevant authorities and to work them through the court system, which was at that point of time, and even in this point of time, not readily available. So even though you can apply for an IPO on your own with sufficient advice and how to go about it, because the courts are not open as they usually were pre-COVID era, it is almost impossible for you to walk into any mahkamah and walk to the registrar and say, how do I do this? Because there might not be a magistrate who is available. And usually domestic violence cases are read in certain courts, specific courts within each magistrate system. Next slide, please. Okay, so very quickly, what are the most common and practical issues that we have identified? Rights of survivors are not informed at every stage. Pre-COVID era, it was already a challenge to ensure that after I lodge a police report, what happens then? Who is going to tell me what is going on with the case? What do I do after that? What is the time frame that I should be waiting for, etc. But during the whole pandemic time, these were even more of a challenge. The dependence on the request and constant follow-up with the IO's investigating officers proved to be very difficult. Rescue and case prosecution in limbo, there was no clear-cut methodology of how individuals can be rescued, where case prosecution was at, whether they were able to get IPO as they required in the time frame that they required, or even EPO for that matter. A positive thing to share with everyone was we managed to get through to JKM during the whole COVID situation, and if there were cases that were in need of emergency protection order as well as IPO, which police officers may not have had the time or or may not have been able to make it a priority to apply for, we have had cases where JKM has graciously put in a request to get the magistrates to come on board and to open the courts just to provide and issue that protection document, which is a court document. And also the code of conduct and guidelines exists, and here we are talking about OSCC, one-stop crisis centers in all government hospitals. We're talking about how cases which are classified under DVA, which are supposed to be handled by D11 officers within each police stations, are supposed to be handled. So while they may exist, but there is inconsistent support by the authorities and hospitals, given that the pandemic needs were greater at that point of time. There were also no, and there still isn't any consistent and systemic victim support institutions in Malaysia. There are shelters across Klang Valley scattered, WAO being one of the main shelter that is providing assistance to women in need. However, that there is simply not enough space for individuals who may be in need of transitional homes or temporary centers. Also, standard operating procedures for DVA cases were not applied. Because of that, it was difficult for the survivors to understand which stage their cases were at, and OSCC systems were not utilized. Typically, what we would have done on most of our calls when individuals were physically assaulted or even psychologically assaulted would be to tell them to go to the one-stop crisis centers in hospitals, because that's what the one-stop crisis centers function is, to ensure that a survivor of violence is able to go there, seek treatment, see a specialist, as well as access police reporting, as well as obtain JKM protection within that one space without them having to go to multiple places. However, we understand and we acknowledge that hospitals were all flooded with the need, and I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for frontliners to actually deal with the whole COVID situation. Yes.
Sorry, we're about to, just please continue.
Yeah, so we're almost done. Okay, next slide. So Charlene has already gone through this. This is typically the way that one would report, and these are the areas of which you would be able to obtain interim protection orders, etc. And finally, this is just information for all. The last slide which I have is really how do you reach out to Women's Aid Organization if you have a query. Of course, we are always looking for individuals to be collaborators with us, to be able to fund the services that we are providing, given that the need is so great right now. So the last slide, please. So these are the numbers that you can share for doctors who are on this platform. If you know of individuals, patients, you suspect patients who are being in an abusive situation, children who are in an abusive situation, these are the numbers, these are the platforms that you are able to reach out to us from. You could very simply, again, we have two ways of reaching out, which is through our hotline and through our WhatsApp messaging, whichever works better. So thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much.
I hope that was comprehensive enough.
That was amazing, Charlene. And I'm just going to invite Charlene to come on so that I can ask you both some questions. But in the meantime, I apologize, Charlene, for having to have stopped you. I know if we didn't have time constraints, I think the lesson I take from this is that this topic is worthy of not just 1 or 2 hours, but probably an actual afternoon in and of itself. And I thank both Charlene as well as Charlene for doing their best to cram what is really a multi-pronged issue into this 1 hour. Now, I'm just going to share with our audience right now. We're actually supposed to be having a break, and we will be resuming at 4:15 p.m. with another amazing topic with Dr. Amar. But for those who would like to just hear, I'm going to be asking both Charlene and Charlene one question each. I mean, we need to do justice to this tremendous work that both these women are doing. And if you want to stay and listen, I'll be really happy for you to do so. Otherwise, you may take your break and come back at 4:15, where we will be moving on with the next segment of the next session. So Charlene and Charlene, don't go anywhere. We've actually got a lot of questions for you, but I think I'm just going to ask you one each, and I hope you'll be able to help the audience. Now, in the course of your 1 hour talk, there's been so much feedback that this is a really live and important subject to many people. Charlene, I'm going to start with you. One of the questions that was asked was, are the regulations different for people of different religions? I think that's a very important question. For example, would Muslims be under a different Sharia law, or do those laws cover everyone? And perhaps, if I could add an additional thing, what challenges would some of these different communities face in seeking help? Charlene.
So basically, the act is meant to make it easy for victims to achieve protection. So the mechanism is such that all you need to do is to go and see the JKM. The JKM will give you the emergency protection order if they are satisfied that there are grounds to do so. Protection orders and interim protection orders, also you don't really need a lawyer, but I would suggest that if you are unfamiliar, you're illiterate, you're challenged in communicating very well, it would always be good to seek out the support of NGOs who are familiar with domestic violence, or actually go to the legal aid centers. So don't go through this alone. There are many people who can help you, whether through the phone, through chat, and I think Charlene can also echo that through WAO's own experience. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Charlene. Yes, go on, Charlene.
Yeah, so as what Charlene mentioned, the WAO support system is not just limited to reaching out to us through a hotline and receiving advice or receiving options of what you can do as a survivor of violence, or as someone who is a bystander who is watching someone being in a situation of violence. The whole system that we have here at Women's Aid Organization is typically to ensure the individual case management. And individual case management really looks at the individual need of each case. It is safe to say that there is no two domestic violence case that is alike. And therefore, in that context, the whole idea of ensuring one social worker is made available to support the client is definitely the best approach that we can bring about. Now, I just wanted to very quickly touch on the fact that yes, IPOs and I mean the Domestic Violence Act is for everyone who is everyone who falls under the act. However, we find that the challenges often emerge at the point of reporting, not at the point of obtaining a IPO or a EPO, but it is at the point of reporting domestic violence. Because of cultural views, because of religious views, because of the sentiment of the sanctity of marriage and keeping the family intact, etc., we find that frontliners are not sufficiently sensitized in such a way to deal with cases without putting their input on what the survivor should do. And therefore, in many circumstances, we find that women who we have prepped, who have spoken to, who know what exactly they need to do the moment they walk into a police station or the moment they are seen by even nurses or at the Pondok Police in the hospital, the moment they start to relate the issues that has happened to them and start their journey of lodging a police report, seeking an IPO, etc., they are discouraged to think about their kids, to think about, is this really, do you really, and the most common question that, is the most horrible one of all is, are you sure you want to put your husband behind bars? Which then deters individuals from going forward. And that is also why there is a lot of what we call tarik balik cases, which is where women think about it and they decide, you know what, maybe I don't want to go through this, and therefore they withdraw their police report. And withdrawal of police report would typically mean that there is no investigation paper that is being filed, and therefore the IPO cannot come in place.
Thank you. I suppose the most prominent one where we all seem to all be aware of in the last MCO was the Sugu Pavita one, where she withdrew her complaint. And I think at this point, it behoves on me to sort of wrap up this session, but I think the real message here is this conversation hasn't ended. And I think at our MLSM level, we recognize, I've got 9 questions here. And I think there needs to be a time and a space for these 9 questions to be asked and answered. There are a lot of people who are concerned, not only for themselves, but for the people around them. And on that note, I just want to thank both of you for both excellent presentations. You really have started us thinking in a more meaningful way, because I think we all know it like a tangent, but because these are things that you've put so much time and effort in, we will honor this afternoon by thanking you again.
Thank you for the opportunity, and we give strength to the survivors.
Yes.
Thank you.
It is 4:09 right now. I apologize that we've taken in some of your time of your break, but we will be resuming again at 4:15, and we'll be hearing another 2 amazing speakers on the topic of children and the disabled. And to introduce them, it'll be my privilege to acknowledge the moderation will be by my MLSM Exco colleague, Dr. Siti Rohayu Kamal Bahri. Thank you, everyone, and have a good break.
Bye.